ready for this? Woo. All right, let's say a prayer.
All right. As far as craft goes, I actually sort of forgot. I keep forgetting. I've heard this several times, that I keep forgetting that I'm talking about stuff and I'm not just reading poetry. So I'll talk about stuff a little bit. I started writing poetry in high school. Is anyone in high school? Nice. I started writing poetry in high school, and I was a junior. And that's really to me, that's kind of the most, between 10th and 11th grade is probably the most important time in a human being's life, because so much gets set for you when you're in those ages. I think our culture thinks of college as being the most important grooming time or decision-making time, but for me, those decisions get set when you're in 11th and 12th grade, or 10th and 11th a lot. So I love high school for that reason. So I started writing poetry, and I thought it was horrible, but it also put me in this weird state of mind where I could go anywhere and no one could really stop me. So there was a lot of freedom in it, because I could write out any scenario I wanted to, or make any word combination I wanted to, and it was up to me. So that freedom made it so that I really wanted to. People can sit in the front. I'll back up.
We're shy in this county.
That's fine. There's 3 seats up here.
There's lots of seats,
Okay.
y'all. Don't be shy.
It's fine. I'm not. It's great. Come sit in the front. Well, also it's a little disconcerting because there are empty chairs here. Okay. So I liked it for the freedom, and I also had a natural verbal gift, which sometimes frequently annoyed other people. And then also my persona also annoyed people, so I figured that was a good combination. If I had an annoying persona and an annoying gift of words, if I could put those 2 things together, it would be really annoying. And I ultimately did, with the help of college, where I took some creative writing and then also was writing in the margins of my notes a lot. I remember one, I called it binary, because I could only fit 2 words across in each line because it was in a margin. So I wrote a poem called Binary, and so that was a formal constraint. That was natural. So then in graduate school, I went to graduate school at New York University and did a lot of workshops, and I have really mixed feelings about workshops. I think we could talk about that later, maybe if you have questions, but I have some negative views about art and studio reviews, and workshops as well. So that critical voice gets developed, and it may be more of a committee voice. Again, we can talk about that in Q&A. But I think I kind of thrived in those workshops. I don't know maybe if I had gone and lived alone on the Isle of Innisfree, I might have done better. In a bee loud glade, I think I probably would have done better. Or like Thoreau, living in the woods, living deliberately, instead of by committee of people paying $27,000 a year. So after NYU, I went to seminary for a year and I had to bail out because that wasn't a fit. That wasn't a good fit, as people say. Then over years, I kind of kept doing poetry. I wasn't doing it professionally, really. Who does? But then I went back and did a PhD and started teaching. And now I don't have a job and I just write. So that's kind of how my career has gone. And in 2005, I published a chapbook, which is a little book of poems. Also in 2002, I published a little book called Bangs. And those 2 little books helped me think about publishing my work in collections. And then in 2007, I published this book called The Bird Hoverer. And it was really fun because the guy that painted the cover is named Conrad Bacher, and he's a friend of mine, and he's an artist who went to Calvin. And I could start to see that poetry wasn't just a one-man show. It was really a group effort. and the packaging and presentation and distribution and the readers. This is a team that's at work. And so I started to get a sense of that, and maybe even more so in the one that came out 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, which is called Lovely Raspberry, which is here. I started to hear the poetry that I was writing started to grow in the sense that I was more aware of my audience, because I started to get critical, I started to get reviews. I was floored. I mean, now I feel like it ought to happen, so things that floor you at once become expectations later. But Boston Review ran reviews of both my books. Library Journal ran a review of my second book, where they were really nice, and not just nice, but really smart reviews. Like I could tell that they had read it, and I could tell that it actually did mean something to them. And so that started to become a feedback mechanism for me. And I don't really live by reviews, because I've seen some negative stuff, like writing off what I'm doing as being too jokey or too unuseful, or I don't know. I don't really pay attention to those. And I don't really thrive on the good ones either. It's just encouraging to know that there's a feedback system. You know, there are people that... okay, then one last layer I'll give you before I start reading some poems is that in 2008, in the January of 2008, my poetry, so 4 years ago, my poetry approach and philosophy took a turn, because I was invited to read poetry at a comedy event in St. Louis. And initially I was petrified, because I thought I'm going to have to memorize everything I read and like stand with a mic and like warm the crowd and all this stuff. And it didn't feel right. But I took it because I thought, what harm can it do? So I went to that night, and because I had done my dissertation on comedy theory, it was funny because it's all the stand-ups and improv artists there in the green room were pestering me with questions about their work. Like, you know about comedy, tell me this. Why did this joke work and this joke didn't tonight? And I was suddenly an expert on comedy, where I hadn't even done stand-up before, any stage work at all. But it's because I wrote my dissertation on comedy theory, and I did actually know about how comedy works in a social setting, and I know enough about comedy that I could talk about it all night, probably. It's just not, I didn't expect that. So, but in the January of 2008, I did my first comedy event. And since then, I've probably done another 20 or so comedy events, where it's just a comedy event. The other people are doing stand-up and improv and stuff, and then I get up and read poems. And the very fact that I come out reading poems is already funny, because it's so, I'm like the clown to the clowns. You know, I'm like the alternate clown. I'm the straight man. And in fact, I'm so pedantic and so annoyed in my readings that all the comedians really suck up to the crowd. The way comedians work. If you've ever been to a comedy show, hopefully, maybe not. If you go to one, you have to go to a good one, because if any middle or lower level comedy is just, to me, I think, really annoying. It's like watching Comedy Central at 2 a.m. or something. It's just, there's not that. They're too crowd aware, for one thing. If they don't get a laugh, they're dying, and you can tell. And they start pushing harder. And then they start telling dumb jokes, and then it gets real sexual and coarse. And that's kind of the tendency. So they'll resort to more and more graphic and vile humor as a way of jarring the audience loose from their malaise, or they're checking their phones or whatever. It doesn't work, really. It's just watching the throes of entertainment death. And I have to, and so when I get up, I don't, it's an alternative to that. I have my stuff prepared. My, as they call it, material is good material. I read at the New Orleans Comic Arts Festival, and on the main stage, in between, I mean, I was like 2 or 3 guys that are well-known comics. Then I did my thing. And afterwards, Will Ferrell's people were there. And I was like, please, give me a job. I would love to work for you or Will Ferrell or just visit Will Ferrell. And they were like, well, the guy put his hand on my shoulder and he gave me his card, put his hand on my shoulder and he's like, the best thing about you is that your material is great. And I had never heard my poetry called material. But comedians call their work material. Actually, it's not what good comedians do is not too different from what good poets do, which is to call attention to things in the world that you already kind of know, but you didn't know you knew. So it snaps the world into focus in a slightly different way that makes you interested in the world again. It refreshes your interest. So I love good comedy for that. And I love good jokes. I like Mitch Hedberg, who's been dead for 10 years now. If you know Mitch Hedberg, or Steve Martin, or Stephen Wright, or some of the more observational comics who are content not to try to get anyone to laugh at them, but just seem like they're overwhelmed with their own perspective on everything. Steve Martin is also the same way. Great, intelligent comedian, and who in his first, I'll end with this, but in Steve Martin's first 6 months or 8 months of stand-up, because he was a magician at Knott's Berry Farm, and then he started to do comedy because he was telling jokes between his magic tricks, and he was young. He was probably 20 or 19 or 21 or something. But then he decided to try to just do stand-up. So he'd do magic tricks and stand-up. And anyone who knows Steve Martin's earliest work remembers that there was some magic too. Steve Martin, one of the things he did, if you read Born Standing Up, which is his autobiography that came out a couple years ago, he admits that he actually recited poetry too. So he would recite T.S. Eliot, E.E. Cummings, and one other poet that you wouldn't think. Steve Martin, I can't remember who it is, but you wouldn't think. Those other two I can almost see. But the other one, I can't remember who it is, and you wouldn't think. But in his autobiography, he says, I tried it. It didn't really work. That part of my act disappeared. So, but his instinct was to be philosophical, verbal, an entertainer, and also provocateur. And what was left for Steve Martin was the thing that ultimately got him into the arenas full of 20 or 30,000 people and made him millions and millions of dollars. So with that said, that's kind of, maybe the poetry now is going to be kind of disappointing because I always think reality is more interesting than the funny things or stupid things we try to say about reality. But I'll go ahead and read it. And some of the stuff I'm reading is... well, I'll just read it. Since this is an educational forum, I'll say that when I give a poetry reading in general, I never say a thing except read the poems. I get up. My cousin is sitting here in the front row and her fiance. They were at a reading of mine in Asheville recently, and I think pretty much I got up and just read. I don't talk in between. I don't say, now this next poem, which a lot of people do, and it just annoys me because we don't want to... Okay. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll just do my shtick, and I'll just go through my stuff here, and then I'll stop at the end and we can have some more discussion. An invitation. We invite you to celebrate New Year's Eve 2012 at the Aviary. Doors open at 9, and though many birds may attempt to escape, we've hired armed guards to shoot them down into feathery piles as partygoers stroll flexibly into the ballroom where a live band composed of men with beards and amber sunglasses will be playing old jazz standards backwards while clouds of smoke shrink and re-enter their cigarette tips, Benjamin Button style. Hors d'oeuvres will appear at 10, followed by a course of roasted grouse and capers, and certain bored cinema men will read newspapers while sitting in seats not assigned to them, and won't it be gay? Will you bring Proust and une bouteille de Chambord? Wear your most frolicsome trousers, plaid or panic-themed. You ladies, will you bonnet your heads and drool TV quotes into cheese samplers that have arrived on well-carved boards? We will have produced them as if from a wall of mist, from our nether kitchen of fun, from our place of celebration. And it is to this and so much more you have been invited heretofore and also again this year. Oh, and for dessert, a white whipped bed of suppressed ennui, topped with slices of cinnamony pear. Enjoy it while it lasts, because it's all your New Year's pasts beginning at 9 and lasting till when? Till we spot the greater prairie hen, of course, flapping toward the open door. By then we'll be soused, coughing up little chunks of grouse. So these are newer. Oops. No meta. A novel. Please write me a novel in which things are wonderful in the future, said my new girlfriend, then paused to adjust her skirt. She didn't realize that I'm a stevedore and don't have a girlfriend. And besides, I live in Cleveland. I run a rat show for the Ecuadorians while my invisible butler serves them fake punch. It may sound gimmicky, but at least it doesn't pay the bills, nor does it pay off the ducks that have those bills still partly attached to their horrifying heads. Though I wish it would, because then I might get clear of the jackass duck mafia constantly on my tail. Please write me a novel, she began again, as if already revising, in which... But then her words became soupy and depressing, and besides, who really was she? At first I tried to delete her from my phone, then called a friend in Brooklyn at whose pad I'd crashed not weeks before, and she suggested looking up girlfriend in the Pictionary. So we began communicating via hastily made drawings. First of some dictators sitting at a bistro outside in the springtime, one of them laughing, saying, "Write me a novel in which the undesirable ethnic other has been purged," and the others laughing too. And my Brooklyn friend guessed, "Hyundai dealership?" I'm the rat man. I can't draw. I want to make things wonderful for both of us, but I wouldn't know where to start, even if I could write prose, my fine-feathered friend, or friends. P.S. Can't get over that hat. On the loss of a finger. There's no way to describe how sad I was when I discovered my fingers had fallen off. I mean, you find one stub in the bed sheets, okay, you can live with that. But 3, 4, 7, and this morning, the 10th, it was like when my toes fell off, only worse, because I didn't use toes. What are toes? But I had even named my fingers. Edith, Marlene, Gretchen, Bethany, and so on. Gwen. 10 was named Mary Lou on account of her inordinately diminutive size and occasional bouts with dyspepsia. When I found Mary Lou this morning, I laid her upon an unused limestone soap dish in a shroud of serviceberry leaves and sprinkled her in body powder and prayed then for a quick ascension through perdition, manual labor, through the finger puppet angels and up to her final glorification. No longer tiny or sour-stomached, but long, smooth, and incredibly sexy, crowned with a perfect halo of a nail. Worms. Cyclists, as a rule, think bikers are cheating because they have engines. Pedestrians, in turn, think cyclists are cheating. They use wheels. People in wheelchairs think pedestrians have a leg up for obvious reasons. But pedestrians think the same thing about people in wheelchairs. They use wheels. What makes people in wheelchairs unique is that they also think cyclists and bikers are cheating. Their disdain is uniform. The wheelchairists' hypocrisy lies, however, in their use of automobiles. Everyone uses automobiles except worms. Worms think they're better than everyone. Worms think they're more authentic than everyone. This is why people say worms are self-righteous. To worms' credit, however, they aren't hypocritical, except the ones that glide down the sidewalk on hundreds of tiny legs, blithely ignoring their wilted, sun-blackened comrades. Those worms are called millipedes. Those worms are really bad apples. A sentence about boomerangs. A sentence about boomerangs. This morning my face, after I tried to rearrange it by putting the nose up here, one lip here, the other there, etc., snapped back into its original formation, as if fated to be that way forever. And in the same way, my schedule, after I repeatedly tried to make time for you by changing an appointment here and not going to a show there, kept returning to its original ladder-like formation, and I wonder if these curiously similar experiences have something to do with the fact that you're only an imaginary friend, Mr. Puddlewump, or if they have to do with the fact that yesterday, all the boomerangs I'd thrown during the various stages of my life returned within minutes of each other, hitting me on the back of the head in sequence like dancers that can't wait to get off stage on a drizzly night when the audience is tiny and the manager appears to be drunk backstage. Critique. That's not very good. Try doing that differently. That's not very good either. You're not very good at this. The love hat relationship. I've been thinking about the love hat relationship. It's the relationship based on love of one another's hats. The problem with the love hat relationship is that it is superficial. You don't necessarily even know the other person. Also, it is too dependent on whether the other person is even wearing the favorite hat. We all enjoy hats, but they're not something to build an entire relationship on. My advice to young people is to like hats but not love them. Try having like hat relationships with one another. See if you can find something interesting about the personality of the person whose hat you like. You bore me. You bore me, so be it. I bore you and enjoy doing it. Let us learn to bore each other without worrying about it. You act all shy around me, and that's your prerogative. If I act shy around you, it's because you're pretty and I want to kiss you. I wish I were Canadian. If I were Canadian, I could be boring and get away with it. You'd say, this man is from Canada. He bores me. He acts shy. He wants to kiss me. And you would let me kiss you, not only on the lips, but on the cheek, neck, shoulder, belly maybe, because I would be Canadian and have scruffy hair and big eyes. But alas, you bore me too. You act like you're from Michigan. Trees. I wouldn't go so far as to say there's no such thing as trees.
Did you get paid for that one?
Yep. Hippie slang. When I say I dig graves, what I mean is I enjoy and or understand them. I have two football poems, even though football season is over. I'll read, now this is a little bit of information. I'll read two football poems, three actually, that mean a lot to me. This is called Gainesville. Much is going on in Gainesville. Okay. Gainesville. Much is going on in Gainesville, I hear. They're roasting tomatoes and whatnot. They're grilling lamb and boiling hominy and getting ready for football season to have started, which it has. Much is happening in Tampa, too. Carpenters are installing custom cabinetry. New clients popping up all over the place. Kids are sitting on top of their parents' cars watching shooting stars, and all in preparation for football season to have started, which it has. And it has started with a flourish, with the Gators winning their opener and whatnot, and the Bucks winning, and the Seminoles winning in OT. And the Dolphins pulling out a nail-biter, and all the announcers and commentators and calling callers buzzing melodiously about the Gators and the Dolphins and conjecturing statistically about the Seminoles quarterback of the Bucks, the Dolphins kicker, the kicker for the Gators. Much is going on in Largo, I hear, and in Pensacola. Even though Pensacola is on the barrel of the pistol of the Sunshine State, the Pensacolans too are getting ready for football season to have started, which it has. They meet each other on the street and ask, "Are you ready for some football?" And they laugh. They make hand gestures that are football related. There is an air base in Pensacola, a naval air station. Some of the seamen stationed there, airborne, root for Navy, logging on to NavySports.com. Navy went 8-5 last season, and some of the Pensacolans know this without logging on to anything, and they dice cheese and pop chip bags between two fists and spray beer and hooray to each other, and in backyards go deep to receive thrown corn cobs, pine cones, imaginary footballs, etc. The quarterback. I, too, have seen the quarterback pop off his chin strap and trot toward the sideline. Have watched the kicker take over, grim in his confidence, only to have his punt, partly blocked, tumble over a press of bodies, downed on the spot. Have seen, as you've seen, analysts in gross ties explain what just happened, and what a disappointment the season has been for this quarterback, upon whom we had pinned our hopes, and have wondered to what to attribute this loss. Have watched replay after replay of my own life, diagrammed in on-screen pen, a circle around where the intended receiver was when he missed the pass, and a line drawn to an X where he should have been. And in short, I was afraid, or at least wished life had a halftime. Just 20 minutes with the team, revisiting strategies we'd drawn on the dry erase board, but forgotten somehow. Team. There's no I in team, but there's one in bitterness and one in failure. My best wand. Of all the magic wands I bought over the years, only the steel one with the sharp tip really works. You point it into someone and say abracadabra, and the person magically becomes wounded. Totally tattoos. A. 1. Poetic diction has been called an elevator use of language. I ran over squirrel. B. A new philanthropist on the scene claims that the so-called litmus test doesn't actually test anything. A litmus quiz, he smugly calls it. I would like to smugly call him something, but as a gentleman I shall refrain. Instead, I shall water up my daisies that I've been growing in the park for the enjoyment of the general public and make a call on my mobile phone. Where that call will be directed is none of your business, but I will single-handedly make it your business by telling you that it will be directed to Elmer Gantry. C. Even when words like smudge pot and beetle bag are hotly contested, as they have been of late. Even of late has been hotly contested. Even hotly has come under some scrutiny. Even the idiom come under scrutiny has come under scrutiny. Oh, crowning irony. D. Wherein hatred of or refusal to compose love poems does not equate to a hatred of or refusal to love, and wherein the tricky little squirrel perched on the end of my nose, having found no twig or buttress upon which to perch, has dug his claws in proper. But also wherein you are still really, really pretty and nice, and I would not refuse an invitation to hang out at a time that would be convenient to both of us. And finally, there is the matter of having placed one too many hats upon my own head, whereas it was designed to accommodate only one hat at a time. E. Lyle Lovett? What? Every day I get emails that say things like, Belz, we should have done that one thing that one time, remember? Really though, how are things? And I always reply the same way, like, dude, I do not know who you are. Where do I know you from? But I never hear back. I save all those emails in a special folder labeled, I hate my life. You can't pick your friend's nose.
That was on my refrigerator.
Thank you. You can't pick your friend's nose. You can pick your friends, we used to say, and you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose. We said it often and understood what it meant. Man lives within constraints, be they moral or natural. Our little lives are limited by rules or laws, boundaries we knew were there and dared not cross. Nowadays, my son tells me, you can pick your friend's nose. You just can't eat the booger. So there are still constraints. But things have changed, and I'd say for the worse. My father says in his day, you couldn't even pick your nose. For him, things have been changing for a long time. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree is poor grammar. The apple actually falls not far from the tree, close to the tree. For if the apple doesn't fall, no matter where it doesn't fall, it never lands. The apple, one might say, never falls or lands anywhere, not even far from the tree. I, for example, have I fallen? My father was not a grammarian. Regret. I can't bear to look at you, she said, as she ate a banana she had named Stephen. Closet introvert. I never let anyone know how shy I am. My chosen vocation. When you emailed me with news of my failure in my chosen vocation, it left me confused, but also rather sexy looking. I slumped on the couch in a daze, and my hair was messy in an intentional way because I had volumized it with Matrix Essentials Foam Volumizer. My beard was also volumized with a vitamin-enriched formula that nourishes dormant roots with essential nutrients, so that I looked like Walt Whitman after he had walked along the beach under the paling stars of morning. Ice cream. I scream, you scream. We all scream when we get stabbed in the heart. Valentine's Day poem. How hard it is to be separated from the one you love. How much harder to be separated limb from limb by an orangutan. Alberto VO5. The thing I like best about Alberto VO5 Extra Body Shampoo is not that it contains nutrients. nor even that it contains shine-enhancing nutrients, but the graceful way it contains them, which is the same way you carry bitter regret, my love, invisibly, allowing it to work its way naturally through my hair. Disparate Housewives. This is a show about housewives who are not similar to one another. Angels. So what if you never get that nose job and you die with a big nose? You once owned a Bose stereo and appreciated its room-filling quality. So what if you only like Rammstein, Bjork, and that one song by Falco? Let's talk about the many things you've built with Legos in your time. The non-representational objets d'art you've constructed out of Lego blocks that came as close to the sublime as, say, Pollock and de Kooning combined. Let's talk about jettisoning the present and not worrying for now about the size of your nose. You used to be a docent, and a good one. You used to be what one might call a cleric. Frankly, you used to be a lot like Robert Herrick. So what if neon signs distracted you and you plowed into a median and now no longer know the difference between tubes, be they boob, inner, or fallopian? And so what if something's on the tip of your tongue but you can't quite put your finger on it? Because when you're dead, you won't even be able to put your finger on the tip of your tongue. So let's talk about Bishop Spong. You used to be his right-hand man, his Guy Friday. Am I wrong? You were kind of a jet-setter, a member of the weirdo fringe, a spiritual minx, hopped up not on jalapeno poppers and happy hour cocktails per se, but on prayer, sola fide. So what if you went prematurely gray? It was just around the temples. So what if in the snowbound cathedral of old age your imagination returned to courtship's secret garden complete with hidden fountain causing your resolve both to stiffen into action and harden into a trouser mountain? Time may bring oldness, but youngness is not necessarily better. Ask Cheddar. It's all good. Or to wax cheesy, it's all Gouda. On that note, so what if you love wordplay so much that sometimes you forget to brush your teeth? And that to compensate for this, you've begun brushing them at inappropriate times, like during the opera or within 5 feet of an active mime. Never neglect the little things, a character in a famous play once said, and one should never be where one does not belong, sings Dylan in a song. So let's talk about your need to heed Dire Straits' advice to walk away, or at least to scream, walk this way with bad 80s hair. Let's talk about the Thomas Crown affair. You used to be a playwright, didn't you? Or maybe I'm thinking of a character based on you in a play that was published after your death by a playwright who'd purported to have written a history, but had played fast and loose with facts no one else really cared about or knew. Anyway, you used to be you, and now you're a shell of your former self. You're like a badly drawn cartoon elf on the studio's cutting room floor, but so what? Because you still have eyes, man. She's gorgeous. She loves you. To everyone else, the next step is obvious. You grab her by the purse straps or the shopping bags and lay a smooch on those carnivorous lips. You used to be good at caressing a woman's hips. What happened? The condo and Ferrari proved too much for you? Silly old corkscrew. What's gotten into you? Sitting up at night in a wingback chair before a fire opening old bottles of wine as if they'd never been opened before. So what if you're still working on the same portrait of Dumbo you've been working on since forever? So what if you're not clever or an inventor or whatever? It don't make no never mind. You were once a diamond. You shined so bright that many of us left your penthouse parties partly blind with images burned on our retinas of you styling various hats and the sound of your calliope-like voice echoing in our minds. You, in your bum sweatshirt and sweet mop of hair, calling out round after round of liqueur shots, instructing a flunky to finish lacquering a chair or something. But so what if you used to be the man, and now you're merely a square? Every great life wrecks at odd angles. just as every flag loses its spangles in time. You might be just the square to right the rectangle, or the wheelwright to round it, or coxswain to steer it by degrees away from senility's awful shores, which, if I'm not mistaken, lie just off the coast of Wales. Whatever. Get your corduroy coat and your tattered train case and prepare for a trouncing. And remember, don't start punching until the thing stops bouncing. Okay, just two more. Signal versus noise. For Norbert Wiener, a signal was something that ought to be filtered from noise. But for God, at least in this life, the signals merge with the noise. And although maybe that's just God's way, it's possible God is more like Gwen Stefani, in that he expects us to hear over the din of the hip-hop club of this world him shouting, "Holla back, girl," and wants us to holla back somehow, through prayer or maybe just lives of self-sacrifice. The last one I'll read is called How to Write a Poem. And I was talking about this earlier with someone, I guess. Oh, yeah, remember. Comes from discussion. Reading. How to Write a Poem. Tell me not of rain-heavy maple leaves, poet, nor of how leaf shadows sprawl in wan light across a cedar fence, but rather of how terrible you feel for having noticed these things, having captured them in such a way. Then be honest, of how ashamed you are for having been born, having learned to walk on two legs across whatever part of the face of this planet has apparently been assigned to you. Neither tell me of a squirrel pausing on top of that fence, which you say will soon glow silver gray in winter rains. For how, may I ask, do you know that those rains will arrive, or arrived that they will cause a fence top to glow? Rather explain how you started to see the world around you, thought you knew what was going on, but were brought to some middle place between seeing and knowing, and that you were confounded, admit it, by terror in that place, and that words can't begin to describe it. Okay, that's all the reading.
Thanks, Aaron. Don't be bashful if you need to discreetly go that way, or if you want to get a drink, feel free to just keep it quiet. But let's take a few minutes and offer any comments or questions for Mr. Belz. And if you forgot some or something you wanted to say from before, this is your time. So I'll just give it over to you guys. He says he can handle a crowd, so there you go. Let's see how he does.
There's no I in team, but there's one in bitterness and failure. There's also a you in success and a you in failure.
That's confusing. There's a you in confusing. Yeah. So what is that about? I mean, you're not asking a question, but
No, I'm not asking a question.
but there's one hanging in there in the air. And the answer is
The I or the you?
the answer is maybe, but people haven't decided. Yeah.
So your poem about the critique, that critique probably has happened to lots of creatives over and over again, but it's interesting, the idea how it's talking about the failure of your work, and then talking about it in that way has produced a work that obviously gets a response from an audience in a way that successful work does.
I think that critique is what is not said in a workshop, ever. And that's why I think that's why people like it, because it's a subtext, and all the passive-aggressive non-compliments or good advice that anyone ever gives in a workshop, it's saying you're not good at this. It would be nice if someone would just be honest. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think it is not saying what a workshop actually says. It's actually trying to revise the workshop by calling out its subtext.
I guess it was kind of interesting. I'm in art school here in Lancaster,
Oh, you're not good at this?
Yeah, like, you're not good at this, you should be doing something different, etc. So,
That stinks. That's good. I mean, it's better. It would be better for most people in any kind of MFA program or BFA program if someone would say, or would be more honest. I had one professor at NYU who took a poem of mine. It was kind of a long poem, and I was very proud of it. And he said, He said, I like the last line. Start a new poem using the last line. And then we moved on to the next person. And now he's the U.S. Poet Laureate currently. So I take that advice seriously. He was honest.
yeah.
Can I ask what he saw in that last line?
Don't remember.
Thanks.
Words don't remember.
It was a lot of fun to have us laughing nights. We part of our forums we try to introduce whimsy in one way or the other. It's usually not in the lecture, but tonight it was, and I appreciate that. Do you listen to stand-up a lot? And do you have favorite stand-up comics that you think are particularly artful?
Well, I listed Mitch Hedberg, but I never really meditate on comedy. I meditate on other things. And like you can tell, like products. I like hair products and brand names. I like names of old movies and people's names like Elmer Gantry and Lyle Lovett. Like my interest is magnetized by whatever little thing it is in those names that causes a center of gravity. So there's just like this galaxy of words and names, and some of them are like black holes. And so I just like to try to map that galaxy, if that makes any sense. Not listen to stand-up particularly.
The reason I'm interested in that is because it's the one form of verbal speaking, that we still attend to for up to an hour. You hear people complaining about long sermons or something, but these guys kind of know how to do this verbal hook for long periods of time.
If they're good, right?
They're good.
Yeah.
They're good.
Do you think in poetry, or do you have to go and sit and to write?
I think more the previous. Because sometimes I'll say something to friends, and they'll say, sounds like a poem. And I'm like, thanks, guys, whatever. Like, to me, that kind of makes it so, that's just my shtick. That's the way I relate and talk and such. And so I think it's more like the way I think and relate now, more. It's more condensed in the poems. Yeah.
May I ask something so mundane as how do you start getting published? Or how do you start going public with your poetry?
It's just a long process of sending stuff out and getting it rejected. And then for me, there was probably 50 rejections before one acceptance. And that slowly over time, and I mean 15, 17 years of persistent working with editors, submitting blind submissions where they don't know who I am, or cold submissions where they haven't asked for anything. Now, after 17 years, I more often get solicited for poems. So someone is starting a journal, or there's an existing journal, and they say, we have a special issue on this. You seem like you'd be a good person to contribute to it. What do you have? So then sometimes I'll write it, or I have it. And it's funny because I have hundreds and hundreds of poems that I don't ever read out loud and that are on my computer in my poetry folder. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I mean, there may be 700 or 800 or 1,000. I don't know. They're all over the scores of little chunks of poetry. And so it's more like this continual flow of stuff that occasionally I just pick something out of the sludge that looks like an artifact from my mental civilization, But really, it's just like this flow of sludge. So sometimes I'll get a request, like one guy said, we're having an issue on wolves. They'll have issues on everything. We're having an issue on wolves. And so I just did a search in my poetry folder on my Macintosh for wolf and wolves and like coyote and moon and anything I could think of related to wolves, and I found like 5 mentions in all that stuff of wolves. And then I'd read one and I'd think, oh, that's one I wrote. I don't remember when I wrote it, but I kind of like that. So I'd send it.
So when you were starting to send stuff, did you send the same poem around to different people, or did you try to?
That's called simultaneously submitting, and you just have to be careful. It's a practice you have to be careful at.
Okay.
So if something is accepted, you immediately have to notify the other editors. And some publishers have a no simultaneous submission policy. I don't simultaneously submit anything anymore. I have an Excel spreadsheet to track what I've written that I think is publishable or that I'm currently actively trying to publish, and then there are columns for who's rejected it. So I have the column with rejections will have 7 or 8 magazine or names, and then where it's currently is in another column, and if it gets taken, I put the date, and then I highlight that row, and then I move it down to a highlighted. That sounds ridiculous, right?
No,
but
no.
that's just how you got to be a little bit systematic, so you don't simultaneously submit by accident to. Yeah.
You mentioned constraints a few times. Are there particular constraints that you like working within when you're writing poetry?
Well, I like tweeting. And I like tweeting because it's like a 140 character constraint. So I'm very conscious of the end of a tweet coming. You know, you start writing it and you're like, here comes the end. It's right at the beginning when you think that. So I'm the space of a tweet really has captured my imagination for the last year. Exactly. I started March of last year. I started my Twitter. And I love that. So there are some constraints that are more like the kinds of constraints in a game, not like formal traditional styles. Like I don't sit down and write a sestina. I rarely would write a sonnet. I do sometimes write sonnets when I think something is sonnet worthy. But you know, it's kind of damning with faint praise to write a sonnet now. If you talk about something in sonnet terms, you're almost dimming its hopes of seeming important. Now. Why have sonnets taken a hit? It's been 250 years since the sonnet has been popular. The Romantics did a lot towards revitalizing it, Keats especially. But the sonnet is become the term sonneteer is a term of derision. It means you're a cheap poet. All you do is write sonnets. So it's kind of like I don't know. It's the nothing form. I'm not into writing established forms. I can do it, and I have done it. And I do occasionally write in an established form, like a villanelle or a rondeau. I like the French forms because they're more beauty-oriented and less stilted. They're more song-oriented. And less like a sonnet is not like a song. It's like a short, observant speech. It's wit-oriented. A song is not wit-oriented, it's more expressive. So, I mean, I like the forms that are more like expressive. Does that answer your question about sonnets?
Do you think formal poetry will ever make a comeback?
Oh, it's back. It never went away.
Or more so?
The forms are changing, but the forms are it's like the writers are cutting grooves in the road. You can't stop making forms. We talked about this in our little workshop today, which was great fun. I mentioned pop music. Rock and roll is like an instant form. It is the most formal musical exercise. Beethoven would be appalled at the limitations of rock. And you mean I can't just go here and here and here and here, and all Beethoven's imagination of music is constrained? What I have to use drums and a bass and a guitar, and it can only be 3 to 5 minutes, 2.5 to 4 minutes long, or it's not going to play on the radio. I mean, also TV is incredibly formal as a medium. 30-minute slots with ads make it a 23-minute show or 22-minute show. broken up into chunks. I mean, those are like stanzas. The parts of a show between the ads are like stanzas in a poem or paragraphs. And form, I think the difference is not that forms are going away or that we're not using them. It's that they're changing and we haven't begun to think of the things that we do as formal. So when we get 100 years from now, people will look back at what we were doing and think, boy, they all followed that pattern pretty rigidly, didn't they? Yes?
Earlier you alluded-
Oh.
Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth. Earlier you alluded to your thoughts about workshops. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I just feel like, I think the workshop mindset is one of pleasing others, especially like a committee. And that's what the knock against workshops has been. It's like poetry by committee or art by committee. And art just doesn't work by committee. Critique is important and response is important. But the deliberations in a committee, it just becomes bureaucratic. So I almost feel like a workshop is an inherently bureaucratic structure. Also, there's just a lot of pompous people in workshops. I found that it was either a pompous younger person or a middle-aged person who was no good at what they were trying to do. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's like a pompous, sort of could be talented young person or an older person who's trying to do this but doesn't have the skills. And they have this kind of way of acting towards each other. It creates a little, like a committee deliberation. And I don't think your lyrical work or your poetry work survives in a workshop. At least I just don't think it grows.
What is a workshop?
Oh, it's just like a group of, schools have it. It's just like set it up so it's not like a class where you're taking a lecture, taking notes. You bring your work to a group of other people who are doing the same kind of assignment or work, and then people make comments on it to you. So there are different formats for workshops. Ones I'm most familiar with, each poet would bring a poem for the night. It's like a 2-hour thing or 2.5. There would be a break for smoking and so for some people drinking as much as they possibly could before they came back. This was at NYU, not at Covenant, okay? But but the thing is, you'd read it and then you couldn't say anything. You'd have to let other people respond to it, and you just hear so much garbage in a workshop, and you wish you couldn't be in it. I love people, but I don't love the way they do a workshop usually. What would you like to say?
So is it kind of like those who can't teach, and those who can't teach organize workshops?
That sounds funny. I don't know. I haven't thought about that way. You can't, doing a workshop is usually not teaching, but.
Well, yeah. But Annie Hall, like those little moments where just kind of the cynical, I guess, views that like Woody Allen just kind of had, he like takes like little bites out of things, like the idea of a workshop. It seems like something that. Okay, I know. You're talking towards this. I know the problem with a workshop. I think I know. It's that it's insular. It is an insular, medium-oriented exercise uninformed by other media. So if you were to take a workshop with a jazz saxophonist, a novelist, a TV producer, an ad and marketing writer, and an architect, and you were a poet, that would be interesting. I would love to review an architect's blueprints with those other people. And I would love to listen to the new work by a jazz saxophonist with those other people. But unfortunately, poetry lacks, it's not tuned to anything else. And this becomes especially powerful for me when I lived in Hollywood or LA for the last 3 years. And they're so impressed when you say,
you're a poet. It's funny because I'm impressed when someone says they're an actor. And then I'm like a poet and they're like, oh, so, what's it like? And their voice gets a little deeper and, they're more serious about everything. And then they kind of see you as something special. And honestly, I see them as something special. But it would be good if our work could inform each other. So it's more productive for me to work with comedians because they don't have the preconceptions about poetry. And therefore, they can see immediately when I'm sorry, this is a kind of almost like a cuss word to say this, but BSing. Other people from other trades have a better radar for my BS as a poet than other poets do because they're all doing the same thing. So I would like to get out of that. So I'm not, sorry, that's an editorial. I love working with artists. I work with artists a lot. This book, Lovely Raspberry, the latest one, the guy that did the most work on it is just a visual artist and doesn't read much poetry. He made cuts. What he did is he actually put a check plus, or a check plus plus on each one. And some of them he put like an X, like, I don't like this. So then I met with him, and I kept all the check plus pluses. I took him pretty much just straight up, this artist. His name's Dustin London. He works in Brooklyn. I would rather hear his editorial perspective than someone in the poetry world. Yeah.
You said that some of your that it's important to know who your audience is and who you're writing for. Who do you think your audience is now?
Well, it's kind of strange. It's funny because there's a Christian audience for my poetry that I didn't really expect. And I don't think it's just because I'm a Christian. There's something about what I'm doing that appeals to Christians because I think there's a tension between the world and the sacred in what I'm writing that Christians recognize. And if you don't have any sense of the sacred, but everyone has some sense of the sacred. But Christians, I think, have a particularly acute sense of the sacred versus the profane. So in my poetry, that tension gets played and played and played and played. So I think that's an audience I'm starting to think about. And I'm not going to write for Christians, but 20 and 30 something Christians tend to like my writing. And college students used to like it more because it was more jocular before. It was more jokey. Now there are some jokes that are there, like hippie slang and stuff, but a lot of it just keeps rolling, I hope. And then I don't know who else. It's gotten good reception. The poetry world is not always... The responses I've gotten from poets in the official world of poetry has been really mixed. Because I shoot down poetry so much. Listen to this. I got to read you this one. And this may also answer the workshop question a little bit. It's called Bruce Beasley. He's an actual poet. And I saw his book. And this Bruce Beasley is not only an actual poet, he's a Christian. Has anyone heard of him? Okay, good, because I'll read this. He's a guy that was working at Washington University in St. Louis when I lived in St. Louis. And he annoyed me because he was... As much as he had a short red beard, he was little round glasses, he was very serious, and also, in a sense, I just didn't like him because he didn't pay enough attention to me. So one day, I saw his book, maybe 5 years after that experience, or 8 years later. And here's the poem. And then I read it, and I was appalled at how terrible it was. It wasn't just that I thought he didn't like me, and so I felt personally bad. I started reading the poems, and I was like, what are you doing? Bruce Beasley, every sentence in this has an exclamation point. Okay, so I'm not going to read it all loud. I'll just tell you, every sentence in this has an exclamation point. Bruce Beasley, your book still sits unread on my shelf as it has since 1988. I have to admit, it was Halpern's blurb that scared me most. The abundance of phlegmatic narrative. Then there's the black and white author photo. You look too thoughtful. And yikes, those loafers. Then there's the fourth line of the first poem. A pink scab along the bottom of each bloom. I do not like poems that refer to pink scabs on bottoms. Just as a general rule, mind you, Bruce Beasley. And later in the same poem, you can smell it on every bush. Smell what, though? I'll bet you'll tell us, yes, this hankering to get born. That's such a weird word. Hankering. I'm hankering to put your book back. I wonder if this first edition is worth anything by now. I don't mind just leaving it on my shelf, though. It's okay. So it's like, I was so mad. I was just mad because I felt ripped off by years of resentment against this guy that I perceived to be a really great poet. And then I read his poem and I thought, I can't not write about this. Pink scab on the bottom of each bloom is just. I had one teacher who said never to use the word dangling in a poem. And I was like, it was a poem I wrote. I'm sitting at the end of a pier, my feet are dangling over the water, and he's from Kentucky. He was like, don't ever use the word dangling in a poem. Like, move on. I like that. It was idiosyncratic, but it helped set my rudder.
It seems like the poetic tradition is led, if not, overtaken by Christianity for so many years, except like our generation, like since the T.S. Eliot or something. So I mean, do people get surprised? I mean, when you're doing a public reading, it's maybe not necessarily for a Christian audience, that you are a Christian? Do they get hints of it in your work, or do they respond to that? Because again, it seems sadly that you're unusual.
Well, but my poetry is not Christian in the way that Auden, Eliot, someone like some of the later century Christian poets are. Who are they?
Oh yes.
Well, like John Leax, huh?
Lady, what's her name?
Yeah, Denise Levertov, Lucy Shaw.
They deal with sacred subjects, I guess.
Yeah, so really what Christian poetry has usually been is on a sacred subject.
Right, okay.
So what I would say is that a poem like, it's funny, John Milton's Paradise Lost, Christian epic. Christian epic? I don't know that John Milton's poem is a Christian poem. I think Dante's Inferno is a Christian poem, but I don't know that Milton's is, because I don't know that he's saying anything that's Christian. I think he's almost saying something that's not Christian about Christian things. But I don't know that I say Christian things. I mean, I don't say that I know that I say things particularly Christianly. I try to say them humanly, but I'm not talking about Christian things. Occasionally I mention God or prayer, but I definitely don't focus on Christian subject matter.
Right.
So what is a Christian poem? I don't know.
Right, there shouldn't be. No, I commend you. I think it's great. I just think it's sad that there's not more of you, and that's kind of what Will House is about, showcasing and encouraging that kind of work.
Right. Well, I'm saved by grace. I'm not a good Christian, but God loves me, and I'm thankful for that, and with my life, But I just would say, I think you have to. The official public Christian is something that needs to be viewed with some caution, because that self-consciousness of being publicly a Christian is maybe almost inherently harmful. Maybe I'm being too hard on our kind.
I would say hymns are Christian poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are sacred subjects.
Oh, and there's some new songwriters that I think are really good. I can't remember that one really powerful praise song. It came out as a praise song, but it's actually like a hymn. Anyway, there's one that I just love, and I can't remember what it's called. But most of the new Christian praise stuff, I think, is complete garbage. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not just garbage from a lyrical standpoint. I feel like it's garbage from a musical standpoint. Like it's not interesting. And I don't like singing it. And I'm not just a curmudgeon. I am a curmudgeon, but I'm not just a curmudgeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When someone buys, let's say, your new what's your hopes for that person while they're reading it?
Oh, just that it would mean something. That they'd resonate. It would resonate with them somehow. I look at all my books on my shelves, and there are some spines that I recognize as ones that already delight me, just the colors and the font, because I know that book meant something to me. So my hope is that this white spine with black letters and a little pink dot on it, that it would be like a brand. It's like branding. I hope that they see it amongst their other books, and it's not one of them that I felt like Bruce Beasley. Like, oh man, give me a break. What is that doing on my shelf still? So I went to Atlanta with my kids the other day, a couple weekends ago, and saw a play with Tom Key in it. Some of you might know who Tom Key is. He's a Christian actor and theater guy. And we stayed at my friend's house Saturday night, and we got up in the morning and went to church. But that night, my daughter comes in and she has a copy of my book. She's like, I found this under the sink in the bathroom. And it had obviously been there for a while because it was all smudged and kind of wrinkly. And I was like, well, I guess that's good. So that may be the best fate.
As a commercial for this book, I heard Mr. Belz read his poetry this past summer and had to buy it immediately. Brought it home, and it has proven good material. I read it for my family and couldn't stop laughing. And then there was a New Year's Eve party that everyone had to perform or something. So I read it, and it was good material.
Thank you. We're closing up.
Yeah.
Let me say that I have like 5 copies of this one that has Bruce Beasley in it. I'd love to sell all of them because I need gas money. And then also, I really do need gas money. And then also is that I have no copies of this here. But it's on Amazon and in bookstores. And I also have, if you want this book signed, I can't do that because I don't have any copies. But I have a little card that has my face on it and my name. And I'll sign it, and you can have that.
Please do that. Encourage him. You can't take money out of the lunchbox to buy the books, by the way. But yeah, you can either do one or the other. Put it in there. He's going to get all that money anyway. Buy a book if you can. This has been great. I've been having such a great weekend. Last night, my wife and I went to a premiere of a movie that's coming out April 13th. And it's one of my favorite. He's a Christian artist named Steve Taylor. This new movie is based on a memoir called Blue Like Jazz. And many of you have read that book. But the movie is just this crazy, hilarious, excellent film. I mean, he's trying to get it in the theaters to stay in the theaters. So when it comes out, please go and take your friends. But no, kind of like what he's doing here. He's being a Christian in the broader world, doing good work. And it's an excellent film. The difference is the subject matter is about sort of like Christian subject. But it's for a broader audience. You can take your friends. It's just hilarious. It's a PG-13 movie, so they don't pull any punches, and it's just a great, great show. What I love about what he's done tonight is, like he said, he's just trying to write good poetry, so we appreciate his example. So, and by the way, Steve Taylor, I'm hoping to get him to come sometime, because I'd like him to talk about his work. That's where we're going at the Row House. Most of our events are local talent. We're trying to launch careers, but occasionally bring people in like that. You can kind of be a guiding light for us, especially for us creative types. So that's where Aaron was really encouraging tonight. So that's about all I want to say. Thank you guys for coming. Oh, Mr. Belz, I almost forgot my presentation. This is the formal presentation. He is one of my favorite loyal customers. I roast nuts in my backyard, my peanut roaster, and they're good. And so I wanted to make sure that, Mr. Belz, I shake your hand and give you these peanuts. It's part of our thank you meeting. Let's hear it. So, yeah, hang around, talk with him. We're going to close up this place probably half an hour or so. So just chill. Thanks for coming, guys.